0599 or visit us at 137 Western Main Road, St. James. S&H Rum Box. Drinking out of the box.
Bringing you full discussions, the hottest topics, and some tracks to keep you moving. The Drive Time Exchange on Net Radio, taking you above and beyond.
Hospital, yeah, and we can't hear a word from Health Minister Kamal. Whoa. Black dirty water we had to drink. Water say it clean, but it smelling stink. And my friend, you worried, money ain't no problem. My friend, you shouting, money ain't no problem. Whoa, yeah. You can't even use your phone to dial a prayer. Yeah. All the phones in a mess and it's like nobody care. Whoa. You can't even call the Prime Minister. He dump the phones in the Gulf of Paria. My friend, you're shouting, money ain't no problem. Lord, money ain't no problem.
Well, everybody, good afternoon to you. And, of course, welcome to the Drive Time Exchange. And, of course, you're listening to New Era, TT Radio. We call it Net Radio for short. And, of course, this is your Drive Time Exchange. Of course, money ain't no problem. Or is it that the problem is no money? Well, either way, we're going to find out this afternoon with journalist Tony Fraser and his guests. So, Mr. Fraser, good day to you. How are you doing?
Good day to you, Charlo. And where you find that one, buddy?
I'm trying to follow you and think out the game.
Yeah, right. That is Shorty. That was Shorty. What, back in the late 70s, I would think.
That is it.
Yeah, before, I think because he changed over perhaps in the early 80s. So that I remember that as being part of the 70s and the development of the soca.
Yeah.
So good usage of it, Charlo.
Well, interesting enough, and just as I get into your show, when I look at where we are at and how applicable those songs of 40 years ago, we can apply it now. It like just changed certain things, but it can be very relevant today. But when he was singing that in the 80s, 70s, that means he would have been seeing that problem for 30 or 40 years before he even sang it.
Chalo, are you saying that we should change the subject today and go to that subject?
No. I'm just putting that outside here, but to see how long we have been dealing with these problems.
All right. Thanks again for the introduction.
No problem.
And, you're right. We are examining today. We are setting off to look at the party's manifestos and indeed the statements that they have been making on the platform. In the instance of the PNM, the manifesto was released a couple days ago. And today, a couple hours ago, actually, I got what the UNC is calling manifestos. I have it up on another computer here. And what it does is to go through a few of the areas, but we will talk about that as we go along. We are pleased to have three economists with us this afternoon to talk about what they perceive, whether in manifesto or what was said on the campaign trail about what the parties, the two major parties, intend to do with regard to reviving transforming, if you like, the economy and dealing with some of the major issues like crime. I mean, you can't get away from those two as major issues of the present. And to do that, we have Dr. Ronald Ramkisson. I saw him up a moment ago. He seems to have disappeared, but I'm sure that he's in the waiting room somewhere. And we have Gregory McGuire, who has been writing quite a lot about the energy sector. And this was after the loss of the Dragon. And Gregory has been talking about a number of other possible energy projects which are in the waiting, if you like, in the waiting room. And Dr. Vanus James, who is, of course, a senior economist, has been for some time. He is situated in Tobago and talks about Tobago and talks about the national economic circumstances. We were supposed to have the president of the Manufacturers Association to talk about what the manufacturers consider to be important in the manifestos of the two major parties, but it didn't work out. In the end, there was no commitment to the program. So that's the situation. So, gentlemen, let me start with Dr. Ramkisson because I know he, excuse me, he has to leave before we end at 6 o'clock. So let me give him the first statement to the question as to what has he seen? What have you seen, Ronald, on the hustings by the political parties and in the manifestos which have come at the last moment, and that's another issue that we can talk about. What have you seen that has made you think about economic possibilities for the immediate future?
Well, first, Tony, let me say thanks very much for inviting me to your program. And let me say good afternoon to Sir Charles, if he's still there, to Dr. James, and to Mr. McGuire. A pleasure to join this esteemed group of economists. I think, and to your audience, good afternoon to your audience, to Tony. I think or Sir Charles's Calypso money is no problem is an interesting place to start, as a matter of fact. And I want to say that the offerings by several of the parties sort of, it seems as if money really is no problem. when indeed it is a problem, but as economists, on the other hand, we could say the problem has never been money. It has been ideas and putting the ideas to work. So I don't think that the choice of Calypso Tony is a bad one at all. In terms of what I have seen and heard and read, manifestos seem not to be taken as something as very important, especially by the parties who are supposed to perhaps take it even more seriously than the incumbent party, for the simple reason that we would be aware, for example, of what the PNM has been saying, has been doing over the last 9+ years. On the other hand, several of the other parties, they are in this contest to replace the PNM, yet their plans, programs, and so on, as far as the manifestos are concerned, I should say, leave a lot to be desired in my view. In some cases, before coming onto the program, I have been looking for the documentation to support some of the things I have been hearing. And there really is very little, sometimes nothing, on the particular subject. And therefore, one wonders what is happening. Another party just, I think it was yesterday, brought out a manifesto. I want to think that manifestos can be can be a very important tool in terms of education, in terms of a demonstration of what competing parties and the existing incumbent has to offer. However, I don't think it is that manifestos are taken seriously. I will stop there as an opening statement, Tony. Hear my colleagues' views on the topic.
Okay, and let's go in order of Gregory McGuire, giving us your first impression of the manifesto. I know you wrote something about the PNM's manifesto with a focus on the energy area, which is your specialist area. So give us an impression of what you have seen so far, what you've seen and what you've heard coming from the platform.
I think a couple of things stand out for me. One is that obviously the PNM in its manifesto really is promising to stay the course, so to speak, with some of the stuff that they've been doing, and so obviously they have plans for energy sector because they believe that this is the quickest way out of our mess. And they do have plans for a whole host of the other sectors as well, manufacturing, manufacturing, agriculture. There's a heavy emphasis, of course, on youth and youth development, creating more and more opportunities for the youth to become gainfully employed or to become businesses and so on. And that's linked very closely with the agriculture sector, as well as some emphasis on tourism. So my expectation and what I read is PNM continuing the way it has been going, basically playing more emphasis on diversification and placing more emphasis, of course, on correcting the crime problem. The UNC, I think, in their manifesto has, well, I haven't seen anything on energy yet. I just browsed through its manifestos, very creative use of language, but just browse through its manifestos, and but energy isn't there. I would hope that they would come up with that soon. What I did hear in the press conference that they had some time ago was their intent to continue with the Dragon project, notwithstanding the fact that they had criticized it so heavily. They're now saying that the problem is the approach and not the project itself, but it's the approach that the government uses the project. So from what I'm hearing, and they emphasize a lot, and I think that is a topic that is most current. They have emphasized a lot some of the goodies and some of the gifts that they intend to hand out in terms of reduction in income taxes, in terms of huge salary increases, in terms of reductions reintroducing the fuel subsidy and reduction in fuel prices, increases in pensions, and all of these lovely gifts that they are promising the population. I think that is what has been highlighted. And of course, that is to be no surprise that they're highlighting that, because that's what touches the heart of the voters. And this is about winning votes. Right. But yeah, that's where I see it.
Okay.
Of course, it raises issues, of course, of how you're meeting the expenditure. And that's what's on everybody's lip right now.
And the detail of how you lay out all of these projects to going forward. Just for our listeners' sake, I have in front of me here the manifestos, as it's called, and they deal in areas. Just let me call out the major areas. We can't go behind the scenes of it at this point in time, but artificial intelligence is one, cannabis industry, criminal and civil justice system. I had a look through that, and some of the things that we have known, legislation, etc., etc., tackling the crime crisis, healthcare, education, the vision of the child, restoring prosperity to the working class. And there's a lot of emphasis in this area. As I said, I had a quick look at it. I got it a couple of hours ago. And there is a focus there on the working class coming from the trade unions. According to the document, what's in that part of the proposal that has been the contribution of the trade unions. As we know, the trade unions, some of the trade unions, a number of the trade unions have come together and sunk their fortunes, as it were, with the United National Congress. Let me go to Dr. Vanus James now and hear your opening statement on what you've heard, what you've read and seen so far on the campaign trail by way of proposing how the country is to move from where it is in this very difficult economic situation. No more dragon. And I'm sure that Gregory will tell us all about the alternatives and the possibilities in a moment. But your opening statement, Dr. James.
Hello, Tony, and hello, Ronnie and Gregory.
Hello, man.
Well, I had a chance to read what I could find as manifestos, the entire PNM offering, and all of the manifestos of the UNC. And I will have to begin by saying, these documents read as though there are no incumbents in the election, albeit that here in Tobago, we have two sets of incumbents campaigning. We have the PNM campaigning, and we have the UNC's partner in Tobago, in Farley and his team. And if you read the PNM's manifesto, it's as though Stuart Young and his team had just been busting from Mars, because there is no record in the document of the collapse of the national economy from 2015 when Rowley took it over. So now the economic collapse in real terms by 23%. Never mind all this sugary talk about growth here and growth there. If you look at the data that I see doing my job in the UN system, the real GDP of Trinidad and Tobago declined from 18,000 US dollars per person to 14,004 thereabouts. That's a 23% decline. You can't see any sign of that, any acknowledgement by the incumbents who are saying, give me another term, that this has happened. There is no reference to the collapse of our energy sector, no reference to the foreign exchange crisis that just last Christmas business people were shouting to the hills about. It's as though the incumbents not responsible for these things. If you look at the UNC's manifestos or manifestos, you will find no record of the fact that the partners in Tobago created a similar collapse of the Tobago economy. It also declined by 23% from 2015 to now. But you have split responsibility. Up until 2021, it was the PNM, and therefore Shamfa and Diana and her colleagues responsible for that, with Kelvin Charles and so on. No reference to that collapse. And the last 3 years have also shown further collapse, continuation of the collapse under Farley. No reference to that. So it's as though the manifestos were written for people living somewhere else than in Trinidad and Tobago. And I think it's completely irresponsible of these parties to behave in this way. And that's where I would begin the conversation myself.
There will be an argument, I suppose, by the political parties and by people who live by manifestos. What I mean by that is the people who create manifestos will probably argue that it's a document of hope and expectation, and you cannot expect, solid plans and programs backed by figures. And as Dr. James is saying, with historical data as to where the economy has come from over the last 10, 15 years, and therefore put you in a place to move forward. Is that, Dr. Ramkisson, a legitimate argument? I don't know that the parties make that argument, but I'm saying that perhaps that is what they're saying. We are looking for all these kinds of details and historical statements and so on, when that is not the purpose of the manifesto. Do you buy that?
I would say, Tony, that in the context of how manifestos have been done, traditionally presented, sometimes at the very last minute, there's that kind of a thinking about manifestos. But I think we ought to change that. I thought we ought to change that. I thought the manifestos ought to be presented, ought to be discussed within the parties, because they are party manifestos way in advance, and maybe we should have as one of the best rules of governance, where manifestos are presented, let's say minimum 3 months before. Maybe that might be too long. Some will say it's too short, where it would have been discussed by the rank and file of the particular party, that they would understand what it is about. There would be some review of the past performance of the economy, as Vanus is alleging, and that there would be some debate, so that the document that would come out by the incumbent, as well as by those who are in the contest, would have gone through some kind of a process on reflection, and then on looking forward as to how you're going to do. I don't expect that they would have to be very detailed, especially if you're not the incumbent party, who would have access to a lot more information, who would have had several budgets, etc., development plans, as the case might be. However, I think the general ideas ought to be developed, ought to have been discussed, and ought to be presented before, so that the electorate would have some sense of where these parties are taking the country. What is the philosophy about different things, the role of the state, about labor, about business, and how they see the things going forward, so that the electorate itself will be better placed when it comes to voting. I know very well we would have the counter arguments, well, the electorate is not interested in that, they're not likely to spend any time with that, few people are likely to do that. But in reflecting on this talk this evening, Tony, it crossed my mind that, is it possible that those who would pay closer attention to manifestos might indeed be those who live in the marginal constituencies? And therefore, is it not very important that you present manifestos of substance? I'll stop there.
Just before, I had a thought when you were making, in fact, some time ago, in reflecting on the manifesto story, is that maybe a way to deal with this is to present the manifesto early and then argue the points on the platform. It seems as if it's the other way around, but we're going to come back to that in a moment. I think Gregory, somebody wanted to say something.
I was popping in on that same question about the manifestos and so on. And I think that, I mean, I heard what my colleagues are saying, but for me, historically, and I think going forward, that the purpose of manifestos is to win votes. There are no other purpose. It is to win votes. And everything about it is geared towards winning votes. And I think it's idealistic to believe that any political party is going to say negative things in their manifesto about their past performance if their intent is to win votes. So they will suppress that information. So the economic information that Vanus is talking about, they're going to suppress that. Both the mainstream parties are going to suppress that. They don't want people to know that. So it is, for me, in a democratic system like ours, it seems to me that it is for us independent analysts to, in fact, take the manifestos and do that critical analysis. So then that role is ours. That role, the parties, I don't expect the parties to do this at all. I think us independent analysts need to take the manifestos and do that work on it and do that work for the electorate so that they see and they understand what's happening. The business of presenting a clinical review of the economy and where we are and locating future plans inside of today's context, inside of today's international and local context. You will more likely find those things in budget speeches. All of them budget speeches have it, and more particularly development plans of the incumbent government. But I don't see that happening in manifestos at all.
Dr. James, a quick comment on that before we go on to some specific areas.
Yeah, well, I think the point I'm making is that the manifestos are not believable. They're not credible. They are not credible. National incumbent campaigning in Tobago, in Shamfa and Ayana, teamed up with Rowley to destroy the national economy. And then they're coming to say, I have gotten an F in managing the national economy. Give me another term. It don't make no sense to me as a voter, and I will vote on Monday. The same is true here. You destroy the Tobago economy. Agriculture collapse. Transport collapse. Every aspect of the Tobago economy collapsed in the last 3 years. And you're telling me, give my team the opportunity to go to Trinidad and design ways to run the national economy when you can't even manage the Tobago economy. My point is that what the UNC has put in its manifesto does not hold water in the context of the performance of its partners in Tobago. So the manifestos themselves, you may say, well, okay, we're not supposed to take responsibility for what happened, even though we're the incumbents. The incumbents might take that view, but I don't have to believe that as a voter. And I don't think that they will persuade enough. Farley and his team will not persuade the swing voters in Tobago on that story. And I think the PNM will have a lot of trouble persuading people in the corridor that you should turn a blind eye to our management or mismanagement of the national economy. I don't see how those things make sense.
All right, let me go to Dr. Ramkisson now, and we are talking with 3 economists, getting their views on the statements about economic reform and transformation by the political parties, the 2 major ones, and we're talking about manifestos or what's it called here? Manifestos by the UNC, which I saw today. I don't know when it came out, but I saw it 2 hours ago or so. Let me go to Ronald Ramkisson to look at 2 specific areas. Manufacturing, as I said, we hope to have got the new president of the Manufacturers Association, but he declined in the end to talk about that. So let's hear what you have heard and what you've read with regard to the 2 parties talking about manufacturing and tourism.
First of all, the 2 sectors, if what I have heard is correct, have identified both as possible areas for economic growth and possible areas in the non-energy sector for stimulating growth. Well, we have heard this, we have been hearing this for a very, very long time. that is manufacturing and in particular tourism as sectors that we may diversify this economy into. And I must say that there has been some level of activity in those two areas, but it is very easy to agree that we have much more to do in those areas. Let me just say the manufacturing sector has in fact been performing relatively well in Trinidad. I have heard conversations about balancing foreign exchange income versus expenditure, and new markets, and the Ministry of Trade has been doing some work in that area, and we hear about a number of initiatives to modernize manufacturing over the last few years. I don't know that the growth rates in employment, in foreign exchange earnings, in contribution to GDP, etc., is where it can be and where it should be. We need to look at that in much more detail and to be much more proactive in removing the hindrances that prevent these two sectors from doing much better. Similarly, in tourism, tourism remains a sleeping giant, I would say, for us in Trinidad and Tobago. We have seen our neighbors to the north do so much with their tourism, and we wonder why we have just allowed the sector to flounder, to be performing way below what is possible in those two sectors. The manifestos make some indication and go into some details of the different kinds of tourism, heritage tourism, a whole range of health tourism, and so on and so forth. And these are positive areas that have been identified for several years. But what we need to do is to see how we're going to find the money, attract the investments, because nothing will happen unless we attract the investments in those sectors, whether they are foreign and direct investments, as we have done in the energy sector, or whether they are domestic investments. We clearly have to do the things that have been keeping the investments away. And many of the suggestions in the manifestos do not pay enough attention to removing the bottlenecks, removing the constraints that have prevented the sectors from growing even before you get to the point of much stronger investment in those two sectors. I would stop there, Tony.
Yeah, Ronald, you made two interesting connections there, tourism and the energy sector with regard to foreign direct investment, as in the energy sector. Yeah, and it just struck my mind, there is a human element to the tourism investment, which does not exist, at least not in that kind of sharp way with regard to tourism. By that I mean, foreigners coming into, and I'm not pushing any anti-foreigner head, I'm just saying that do we have to cater for foreign investment coming into the tourism sector without full recognition of the local population?
Well, Tony, I think if we remove some of the hurdles that many of us see, many of us want to enjoy what is on offer. We want to go to the countryside. We want to enjoy the heritage, the culture. We want to do that, many of us here. So that if we should seriously focus improvements and getting it right in respect of the sector, I am sure we will not only attract domestic investment and customers, but indeed to the extent that we have foreigners who continue to come here, especially in Tobago, but continue to come here. And I think if we are to offer and deal with the sector with the seriousness that it deserves, especially when we see what is happening to the energy sector, then I think we will be on the right track.
To James.
Well, first of all, there is nothing in the national record that justifies the idea that we can go far with our development relying on manufacturing or even the energy sector. If you look across the Caribbean space, there are two models of tourism-driven development, one of which works and one of which does not work. If you look in Jamaica, for example, where we have a huge beach tourism, let me call it that, model built around many variants of sandals and Ritz-Carlton and all the foreign investment into the hotel plan. Their GDP per capita today is $5,300 US. They're the worst performing economy in the whole Caribbean. There are two fantastic airports in Kingston and Moby. There are more sandals than everybody else, and they ain't going nowhere with beach tourism. If you look in the Eastern Caribbean, you see replicas of that kind of model also taking the economies nowhere. But if you look in St. Kitts Nevis, or in the Bahamas, or in Cayman Islands or Bermuda, you see a different model of tourism, which is where I think the country should go, and in particular, go under the leadership of investment in Tobago, given the platform on which you can build. That's a model of tourism anchored on the production and export of professional services. In St. Kitts Nevis, it's professional education services. They have a consortium, three different consortia of tertiary education programs and the UWI Open Campus. And between them, they've helped St. Kitts Nevis to drive their GDP per capita up to 21,000 US per person. Today, Trinidad and Tobago with all its oil and gas is at 14,004. If you look in the Bahamas, you see a different kind of professional service being exported. About 20, 25 years ago, they moved to complement their beach tourism and their natural environment tourism with production and export of financial services. That's what you're talking about is high value legal services. You're talking about accounting services, portfolio design stuff, and stuff like that. And that has allowed them to shift their GDP per capita dramatically over the last 15, 20 years, up to 31,000. Well, don't mention what Cayman and Bermuda have been doing with the financial services industry. They have outperformed all of these so-called developed countries. Cayman has a GDP per capita that is 20,000 US dollars higher, even in real terms today, than the US. And Bermuda has one that is about 37,000 US dollars higher than the US. So the evidence in the region is not that oil and gas or manufacturing will drive development. The only place where we see growth with development across the Caribbean space is in those four countries I mentioned. So it would seem to me that where we ought to be going with Trinidad and Tobago is in the direction of these four successful cases. And these manifestos that I read are completely clueless about that. That's what I mean when I say they are not believable because they do not represent any understanding of the nature of the difficulties we are facing in this in this country, and especially the nature of the difficulties we are facing in an economy like Tobago. Let me just give you one last piece of data to warn the public about vacuous manifestos. In the last 3 years, after Fali took over in Tobago, the level of undereducation of the Tobago workers, the Tobago workforce, grew from 62% undereducated workers in the sense of those who don't meet the national standards for good education to 68%. And in that same period, people with tertiary education left in droves. From the share of tertiary education in Tobago's labor market declined from 18%, 18.2% to be factual, in 2022 to 16% in 2024. CSO just sent me the latest data today. Now, the point I'm making is the evidence we have in front of us is that the way we're running these economies, the way the incumbents ran the economies over the last 10 years, is causing people from Tobago at least to leave in droves. That's our brain drain that we've long been known for. You're not going to turn that around with fancy promises anchored on no realistic understanding of the circumstances we face. That's the crisis that you see in these manifestos. There is no understanding of the real nature of the problem that you have to solve, the difficulty of transforming the Trinidad economy, and the even greater difficulty of building anything you will call serious tourism or any other brand of economy you want to talk about here today.
Gregory, I know I'm going to push you in the direction of the energy sector, but I'm sure that you will want to say something about tourism and the whole business of manufacturing, as we have been discussing between Dr. James and Dr. Ramkisson.
Well, Tony, yes, I do. I just before this program started, I was just flipping through social media, and I heard a speech by the minister, which had some figures that I thought was surprising to me about manufacturing sector growth. And she went back over the last 10 years, and I think, as I recall, and I might be wrong here, that she said upwards of 10% growth in the manufacturing sector. And that sounds surprising to me, but I don't doubt her figures. But so it means that something may have been happening there. But I want to agree with Vanus that, you know, it is going to always be a struggle for us to make our headway, to make any significant contribution in manufacturing. I mean, we would be able to service the Caribbean market, some markets in the Caribbean and a little bit outside the Caribbean. But to hit the global market, you really need to have products that are unique, and you need to produce them at a cost that is competitive. Those two things become very, very important. Could our manufacturing sector do that? I'm not sure. We wait to see.
What of the possibility of replacing some of the imports? You know, you go to the supermarkets and there are 1,000,001 things that come from, you know, simple things, unnecessary things, but is there a possibility for replacing some of those things?
Tony, we started the program by playing Shorty's Money and No Problem. And I feel that your DJ could probably go back earlier to the 60s, and you must find a calypso there that would speak about buy local and about the whole import substitution thing that we tried during then. So it's an old conversation about import displacement, import substitution. At the end of the day, in this era of free trade, well, what used to be free trade before Trump, you have to be competitive. So yes, we import lots of things. We import slippers, but could we make slippers better than and cheaper than China? And this is where the whole question of the effective exchange rate comes in. And I know that both parties are now arguing about who is going to commit the bigger crime in terms of devaluing the currency. But I'm quite sure every economist sitting down here today will say to you that the exchange rate needs to be corrected. But that's bad news in the political arena. You see? So that's one of the things that might be required. But on tourism has always been, for me, one of the areas that the country needs to go in. And I have to, and I've said several years now, that it requires what I call a very conscious and systematic effort, similar to what was done in energy. You see, we had gas. We had oil all the time that was controlled by the multinational companies until Shell and Texaco decided to leave, and that's when we got into the nationals got into the industry in the 70s. But we had gas, and we had to do something with the gas, and we decided to do something with the gas, and we began by building the infrastructure, right, and investing heavily in the infrastructure, and then we had the skill resources there, and so my thing is that we need that similar, and there's a whole structure that came with that in terms of the role played by the NEC and the role played by people like Julian and the IDC initially, and people like Kirsten Coombs and Carlos Young and that group of energy people who helped pull this thing together and who were focused on maximizing the benefits from the natural gas resources. And if you recall, it all started with the conference in 1972 or 73 called Making the Best Use of Our Natural Gas Resources. And up to today, that's what we've been doing in energy. And I'm saying we've never seen an equivalent focus on any sector whatsoever. And I've been calling for years now for a similar focus to be placed on tourism. I don't know what Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Company doing. Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Limited, I think is the name. Neither do I know what Tobago's tourism company is doing. I know that they're set up to do promotion and so on, but this goes beyond promotion. This goes around building the infrastructure and making sure the infrastructure is renovated and upgraded, doing the promotion, getting the airlift, investing in the hotels and so on. Engage in the private sector, right? And we need to have a private sector that itself is interested in making such investments. Outside of HADCO, I don't hear any private sector party saying they want to invest in tourism. So the government, so that's why the government, certainly this government, who has a passion for big projects, this government and PNM governments in general got a passion for big projects. So you would hear that they're willing to build a $300 million hotel rather than fix facilities and build two $50 million hotels, kind of thing. But in any event, government with its fiscal constraints is unable to make that kind of investment, save and except they give up something else. And there are lots of demands there. So that the private sector is required to follow the lead of HADCO and others who may be willing to invest in that. Israel is a beautiful space now, thanks to HADCO and whatever arrangement they make with the trust. But where else is it happening? I don't know. So I believe conscious and deliberate efforts required in tourism, similar to the kind of effort and structure that we put into making the gas business a success.
All right, just to inform our listeners that we're talking about, we started off really with the manifestos of the political parties, the two major parties, and what they are saying or what they are not saying about what they're going to do to transform and regenerate the economy going forward. And we have three economists with us talking about the matters: Ronald Ramkisson, Gregory McGuire, who you just heard, Dr. Vanus James from Tobago, talking about various aspects of what is happening. I don't know, I know that Ronald has to leave at some point in time. You're still there, Ronald?
I'm still here. I have some minutes more. I'll let you know when I need to.
Okay, I know the talk of your colleagues engaging you and perhaps keeping you in place for a little while longer.
Well, that
So
is partly true. Yeah, you haven't seen them and spoken to them in a little while. So
right.
opportunity.
Right, right. All right, let's transfer to one of the big things that has happened over the last couple of months, last couple of weeks, in fact. And no stranger, no secret about it. The loss of the Dragon Gas deal, given that was the license, the OFAC license was given by a previous American government, and the new president of the United States, Donald Trump, came in, and with his war against Venezuela, has removed the license. Let me start with Ronald again, he having to do other matters. Um, the question is, so what do we do? The gas is, the determination about the Dragon Gas is outside of our control, I believe. I don't believe any kind of fancy diplomacy could change that, as that is embedded in Trump's own desire and what he wants to do with Maduro, etc., etc. What do we do, Ronald, with regard to looking at other areas, other possibilities of making an impact with some of the gas fields, and I know Gregory has listed a huge number of them that are existing and can be tapped in the circumstances. What is your take on outside life after Dragon, if you like?
Tony, thanks for your question. Let me just say to Vanus and to those listening, I think my takeaway from what Vanus was saying has to do with the need for us to be scientific in our approach to whatever sector we choose, and whatever we do must be data driven. It must not just be somebody's bright idea somewhere, which is good, but at some point we have to get down to what works, and we have to be scientific about our approaches in respect of any sector, whether it be manufacturing, energy, or wherever. And I think that that's a very important point. Tony and colleagues, we always knew that the energy sector had a high degree of uncertainty about it. And all we have to do is to go back to the first development plan that we had, which spoke about diversification. And that was the reason why we have always said that. So sometimes we seem surprised, overly surprised, disappointed when economists and others have been talking about the uncertainties, if not about the price, about the quantity, or both. And we understood that these were determined very importantly, especially the price, by external events. And what has happened in respect of Venezuela falls into that category. I think it is positive that we said, since we had an infrastructure, human resource in respect of expanding and doing more business in something that we had or had access to, then it will be foolhardy not to make use of that. It will be foolhardy not to make use of that. It is a little bit cleaner. Gas is a little bit cleaner than oil, and we have that. So let's make use of it. And so I would never write it off, but as always, we should have recognized that the effort and that we put into energy, and we have been putting a lot of effort especially over the last 5-10 years, and focus on the sector, and we have gotten the results. This is a commodity that the world demands. We have it, we have access to it. Then let's make use of it while we in fact develop what other assets, what other domestic capital, to use Vanus's term sometimes, that we have, whatever resource in the creative industries, in tourism, the foreigners would like to come here. So we need to develop a product that if you like, mirrors what happened in oil and happened in energy. There's a product that the world wanted, and we had it, and we developed the capacity and the capabilities to export it. No, that is not true. We have questions over the sector, and we all do. But that kind of focus, I think, on tourism and on other sectors, which we should have been doing, but which these things are now being repeated in the manifesto. I take our mind back to the road to recovery, the roadmap to recovery.
Roadmap to recovery, yes.
And the various development plans and development committees we set up. And we were speaking the same kind of language. We have to live in hope that whoever wins the next election would in fact become much more serious than we have been in the past. Tony, I'll stop there.
Yes, Dr. James, what of life after, I like that phrase, life after the dragon has been slain?
Well, we should have learned by now, not simply because of dragon, that Ronnie is right. You know, we ought to diversify the economy. When I went to UWI, that was one of the early things I was taught by Lloyd Bester and those kinds of scholars. So there is nothing new that Dragonfield is going to tell us. What worries me, and I'd like to hear Gregory's view on it, is that if I were the Prime Minister and making a deal with Venezuela, I don't see any reason I would go to the Americans to ask for permission. I cannot imagine, for example, Eric Williams going to any American president to get permission to make a deal with Ghana or Suriname or Venezuela. You simply function as a sovereign nation and cook up whatever deals you have to make with your neighbor, and deal with the geopolitics of that in the public place. Now,
before you go off of that, Dr. James, isn't there a currency problem here about trading in the US dollar? And perhaps that is why the government here and governments everywhere else, not everywhere else, but elsewhere, seem to go back to the US because they have to trade in the US currency at some point in time.
Well, there might be an issue there, but it's not given by God that we have to trade in US dollars first of all. It may be the immediate reality, but as you see all around the world, there is an understanding that being trapped by the US dollar trading system, SWIFT and all of that, exposes you to enormous risks, including sovereignty risks. And nations need to think about that, and that includes Caribbean nations. I mean, we have this bully in our backyard, and we can't throw our hands up in the air and say, well, we have to simply be subjected to the whims and fancies of people. We've got to be thoughtful. Like, all development requires people to learn and think and cook up new solutions to the problems they face. So even if you face that, there is no good reason for us to say, okay, we're stuck with that. If you look at what China is doing, I know those are big countries, but there are other countries, ASEAN countries are facing it now. And they're moving to trade in other currencies than the US dollar. In any event, with the modern world of blockchain and other technologies, I'm not sure that if we are a thoughtful people, we would be stuck with this, and that would give us any good reason to be afraid of what the Americans might say or do. In any event, this business of working ourselves into this trap of dragon field is just foolhardy. We have enough evidence that we do not even need to exploit the comparative advantages in oil and gas in order to develop our economy. I just cited you some of that evidence. We should have known that a long time ago, and we could at least know it now because we have all the evidence in front of us. And if we understand what we would do is use the lesson of Dragon and all of that to make haste to set up the country properly for real development. First of all, you see all of these manifestos, both of them telling you that the way forward for development is more sandals, more already was. Well, the evidence in front of them is that that is not the way we are going to develop our economies. We have lessons, say from Malta, for example, about how to bring foreign investment into tourism. It doesn't have to be that you bring all your foreign investment to invest in hotel plan. When Cayman and Bermuda were building financial services exports, professional service exports, they brought the whole world in. You don't only need to bring Shell and BPTT into China and Tobago to get foreign investment. You could get foreign investment in any sensible approach you have, as St. Kitts has demonstrated, as Bahamas has demonstrated, and as Cayman and Bermuda have demonstrated. So we can diversify our economy. I give you 50 years, and we would be performing just as well as our neighbors to the north, if we were thoughtful about how we're going to build our economy. But to trap ourselves in the idea that you have to be stuck with cross-border gas deals and so on, is just to have blind man running one-eye man country. It's not the way to go.
Before I go to Gregory, I want to turn to the banker, former central banker, former commercial banker, to talk about this engagement in the U.S. and depending on the U.S. currency as a means of interaction with Venezuela. And there was one point in time where the Biden administration said that we couldn't pay Venezuela in dollars. And I suppose you had to make some other kind of arrangement. Are we stuck with the U.S. currency to make these kinds of arrangements, Ronald?
Tony, I would say for the time being, we are stuck. It is my view. For the time being, we are stuck, and I don't know that there is any reason that we need to make significant changes in areas of uncertainty, or to attract to ourselves actions which we might not be able to counter in the short run. We are all aware of the development of alternative currencies, the crypto, in terms of what some countries are doing, China, South Africa, etc., in respect of a competing currency. We must be aware, and on top of all of that, apart from the currency issue as well, we have the issue of sanctions to consider. In this part of the world, we are a small economy. We know where our major trading partner is. If we wish to change that relationship, it cannot be done in the short run. So we have to be realistic about where we live, who we are, and make, if you like, incremental changes. We must always be open to what is happening, to be aware. If you like, that might be, if you like, a sort of be careful with the kind of risks that you take. And that is perhaps the banker, Tony, coming out in me, and Yeah, so just, it's not that you don't take risks, but you take measured risks. You need to take risks, I believe. They must be well thought out, they must be measured as you go forward.
Okay, just make a point here is that I saw a figure recently which indicates that 37% of international trade is being undertaken with the Chinese currency, the one, or what's it, the other name for it, it doesn't come to my mind at the moment. So that and the BRICS countries, Trump was warning the BRICS countries recently that you better don't go there. Indication enough that there is some concern about that. But we leave that for the moment and we go to Gregory McGuire, who has been writing and talking about life after the dragon. Gregory?
Yeah, Tony. Well, you know, first of all, we never had life with the dragon. Just put that clear. So dragon was a prospect, and unfortunately a prospect that perhaps got too much highlighting for good reason. But before I go into that, let me just say that in terms of dragon and the aborted opportunity, in the short term, it does not affect the sustainability of the gas industry in the short term, even up to the medium term. And that is because there are a number of other projects that are ongoing at this point in time. The SIP field has recently started production. 4 others are under development that should come on stream between now and 2027. And that includes manatee, mento, coconut, and ginger. And there are 4 others that are proven and are awaiting investment decision. And those are Calypso, Blackjack, Onyx, and Frangipani. And all these are distributed between Shell, BP, and EOG Resources and Perenco, all international companies. So these fields will, between now and 2027, maintain existing supply and existing plants, and may in fact be able to take us up a bit from the 26 BCF that we're doing now to about 30 BCF a day. And probably will sustain that level of production for about 4 or 5 years. The problem we have, of course, is in the medium to long term. And that depends heavily on what happens with respect to the fields that are currently under exploration. And of course, and that's why Dragon became important for the medium to long term, because Dragon itself has 4.1 BCF of gas and 4.1 TCF of gas, and it lies in a basin that has 14 TCF of gas that is right next door. And down in the south of us, the Manatee field, which we're now producing, is tied to the Loran field, and that has another 7 TCF of gas. So that Venezuelan gas, and indeed one could add perhaps gas from even Suriname and Guyana, depending on the feasibility of the pipelines, represent supplies that can feed this industry in the long term. Now, having said all of that, it doesn't mean to say that we must now revert to becoming happy and saying, okay, all right, we have gas in the future. The problem that we've had with a wasting asset is that it will finish. Lloyd always used to say that whether it's next year, next 10 years, or next 40 years, the oil and gas will be depleted. And therefore, since independence or before that, since we become a nation, the imperative has always been for us to find other legs on which the economy needs to stand on. And so that remains the challenge that we have today. So I would say that the gas industry, in the short term, the fields that are currently being produced, the fields that are currently under exploration, would provide supplies to sustain the industry, certainly for the next 5 to 7 years. After that, we have to depend on new exploration, or we have to depend on importing gas from Venezuela, West Coast or South Coast, perhaps Guyana, perhaps Suriname, where they all have resources that can be accessed. On the diversification challenge, I think we've spoken a lot about that. One thing that we have not mentioned is the whole question of innovation and where that comes from. And again, this is something that we've spoken about for the longest while. How do we create innovators? How do we create new entrepreneurs, new inventors, people who are prepared to look at problems and come up with solutions to those problems and bring products or services that solve those problems. And the whole IT space is a nice space where no matter where you are in the world, it's a space that if you have the capacity to develop the software and develop software solutions, there's a space there for you. But we need to create a society to do that kind of stuff.
Just to indicate our listeners that we started off on the manifestos and statements of the political parties with regard to their campaigning and how do they reflect the possibilities for the future. And we have three economists with us, Dr. Vanus James, Dr. Ronald Ramkisson, and you just heard from Gregory McGuire a moment ago talking about the possibilities outside of Dragon. Let me ask both Gregory and all three of you, what has been talked about with regard to clean energy as a development possibility? Andrew Jupiter wrote a book recently talking about a whole range of chemicals and so on, green production of these matters. Is that a reality that we can move forward with as something that can take up some of the slack from what is wasting in the ground? Gregory, you want to start? Yeah.
Yeah, there are at least 2 or 3 projects ongoing right now in terms of renewable energy. There are 2 solar projects that I know of, and the attraction of that, of course, is that the more electricity we can generate with solar is the less we need gas for solar, and therefore the gas could then be diverted into other uses. So those projects, solar projects, are going. I don't recall the numbers right now in terms of how much gas is going to become available, but it's one way of conserving the gas and channeling that gas into a more higher value product than to utilize it for energy consumption. The other project that is ongoing is the green energy project. Sorry, the green hydrogen project. And green hydrogen is meant to replace the gas, dirty hydrogen, from the manufacturing process of ammonia and methanol. Yeah, probably, yes, I think ammonia and methanol. So I don't know where that project is on now. I know that they had done a lot of developmental work, and I think they're probably on their way to final investment decision on it. But yeah, that's another possibility. For me, those projects and all alternative energy projects will make a small contribution towards either diverting gas and to new other applications. But I don't think it's something that we could look forward to say, it's not foreign exchange earning by any means directly. It's just reducing the amount of gas we use and diverting such gas into other applications, which so it's indirectly it's probably going to help our foreign exchange situation. But
yeah. Dr. James, on that subject, you want to say something?
Well, I'll lean in the direction where Gregory ended up there, which is that energy is an intermediate input, is an input into the production process. Ultimately, what you have to do is find goods and services that you can export in order to pay for the imports you need to run the society. So we live in the sun, we live in the wind, and we live in the ocean. And therefore, those would provide us, if we are thoughtful, with rich potential to solve our own energy input needs. But and the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago is not about simply our input needs, it's about our exports. What we have failed to do is to diversify from that source of exports. That goes down the road that Gregory was going. And I think we ought to be careful not to delude ourselves much about that issue. I think it's important to observe that failure to diversify the economy also carries huge risks. Ronnie says don't take risks with respect to the Americans and so on. But failure to diversify has delivered 10 years of decline for Trinidad and Tobago and the Rowley. And 10 years of decline in Tobago is the consequence of failure to exploit the potential to develop a viable economy in Tobago. So there are risks from inaction, and there might be risks from bold action. And if I were to be an advisor to the officials of the country, I would say I would err on the side of taking the risks that come with bold efforts to diversify the national economy, including diversifying the resources of the kind that you're pointing to there. So I would be a little bit more vigorous in pushing the fundamentals. I would go for the kind of constitutional reform we need in order to open up the potential in Tobago. There is need for us to exploit community entrepreneurship. The entrepreneurial state is best expressed as community-led entrepreneurship, empowered community-led entrepreneurship. We need to exploit that. You see a good model for that in Castara. It's the same kind of model that you see in Malta. There is no reason for Trinidad and Tobago to be worried about life after Dragonfield when we have to worry about life if we fail to push proper development programs in the country. Not because oil and gas would ultimately be exhausted, but because both oil and gas and manufacturing have very low development signatures. When you run the models, as I do for a living, the development signature on oil and gas and manufacturing is just 8 points above the development signature of an almost non-existent tourism sector in Trinidad and Tobago. The elasticity is 0.21, negative 0.21 for tourism, negative 0.28 for oil and gas, and so on. There is nothing there when you're talking about our development prospects. The more we keep relying on those things, the more the developed countries will drift away from us, the more we will diverge on our side, on the negative side, from and fail to achieve what we offered ourselves as a goal back in 2015, 2020, when Rowley promised development by 2030. It can't work if we keep doing the kinds of things we're doing. So we might as well take the risk and be bold, diversify our energy sources for internal use, and diversify our export options. And those are not old talk. We know actual programming that we can undertake to get the diversification process going. If only we would be courageous enough to do constitutional reform and allow the communities of the society to take responsibility for themselves. Let me just make this last point to you on that. The fundamental reason we are not making any progress with the economy of Tobago is because of the nature of the central government and the nature of the THA. Both are dictatorial systems, and they both are operating on limited information. So the THA doesn't have a clue what Gregory is saying. because he doesn't operate a system which allows Gregory to come and tell us what he thinks about the way we should go. He doesn't know what Ronald is saying. They have no way to hear what I am saying or you do, because of the fact that you're running a dictatorial system which operates on 10% of the information that we need. If you want to develop these countries, the number one resource you have to deploy is the speed of learning of the society. And you can't get fast learning under dictatorial systems of government. That's the number one step towards diversification of the economy.
Okay, so that was Dr. Vanus James talking about the energy sector and really looking at the Tobago situation. I find it an interesting point about the politics and development and the dictatorship that has been operational for a long time in Trinidad and Tobago. But again, that's a different story. I have a special assignment for Ronald Ramkisson, and that's being a banker. And that's the whole question, the issue that, comes forward every now and again and convulses the society, the foreign exchange issue. And my response when I hear, especially the traders, screaming and shouting about it, I say quietly, well, how much have you earned last year? But that's another story. Ronald Ramkisson. Foreign exchange. I haven't seen anything in the UNC manifesto. I can't remember exactly what the PNM manifesto said or did not say about the foreign exchange situation. That is different. A number of things that the PNM manifesto has said, but I have, in my mind, the situation requires some really revolutionary steps to get out of the situation. And I haven't seen any of that in any of the manifestos. But I come back to the foreign exchange issue. Ronald Ramkisson, central banker, commercial banker. Tell us about this difficult situation we are in.
Tony, first, let me say, I'm not so sure how much of a banker I am as opposed to an economist. having said that, I want to touch on, look, the foreign exchange situation. We have discussed that over and over. I don't know that there's anything new to add to what is happening. If we go to the manifestos and say current policy, the PNM has indicated clearly where they stand. All I would say on that, if you're going to have an essentially fixed exchange rate, then you must be prepared to do other things that will generate foreign exchange. You need to control your deficit. You need to, your fiscal deficit. It cannot be, you cannot run large deficits. It's going to put pressure on your fixed exchange rate. And at the end of the day, small open economies, you have to find other ways to earn foreign exchange at the rate that you want to maintain. Because at the end of the day, whichever regime you follow, stability, relative stability in the exchange rate is what everybody would want to have. In respect of the UNC manifesto, well, we know that has turned out, they are not talking about it in the current manifesto, but we have seen and heard and read about what the thinking was in respect of the exchange rate. But at the end of the day, Tony, the bigger problem is that no political party wants to talk about the bitter medicine, the hard actions that might be necessary in an economy that is at this stage. If we want to get back to earning close to 20,000 or 22,000 US dollars per capita, and those kinds of figures, whether you're looking at real or nominal, is another issue, then there are certain things that we have to do at the present time to get back to where we were. And there are going to be, the economy, the society has to understand that we have been benefiting from the energy sector through a number of subsidies, and that we have to talk about that. But this, of course, the political parties do not want to talk about that. But it is there, and we have to get around to talking about that sooner rather than later. I would leave that there for the time being, Tony, and just touch on a little bit of what we were talking about, the diversification, and in particular, away from fossil fuels. In the short term, we may really be talking about saving foreign exchange in respect of pursuing the greening of the economy and the use of wind and the use of green energy in general, the solar parks and so on, where we free up gas for export. So we may not in the early stage be talking about net foreign exchange earnings by whatever industrial actions we do, but by saving foreign exchange. But it is something that we'll have to move on gradually. There are a number of initiatives that are taking place, and some of them quietly in respect of some of the things mentioned by Gregory. A major issue is that of financing. But before we can really get serious about the financing, we have to talk about the supporting human resource infrastructure that is going to take investments into the areas, recycling, solar energy, green energy, hydrogen, whatever. We'll have to talk about the shift that has to take place in thinking in the infrastructure that will then make the investments there less risky, if you like, and therefore would encourage finance to flow in that direction, because the conversation is already on the table in the international community, locally, that yes, there is need for financing new ventures in the green economy, but that there are certain things that would have to be put in there to mitigate some of the risks that are going to be in that direction. Of course, what has happened recently in respect of Mr. Trump's position on the oil and energy sector just adds a lot of confusion and some scaling back of activities and actions, as we see some of the multinationals are taking their cue from what is happening there. So that you know, there's confusion in that area. There's no doubt, however, notwithstanding all that is happening, that there's global warming. Global warming is real, and the entire continent, the Earth is in fact seriously threatened by what is happening globally in respect of climate change. Tony, I would stop there for now.
Just let me ask you, Ronald, I can't resist this provocative question. Did we miss the boat when we shut down the EDAB, of which you were a member?
Well, Tony, we have missed several boats along the way. We have missed several boats, I would say. The ideas, the initial ideas, we have seen over the last 60 years, we have had some brilliant ideas about many things. And some of them, we got started. We started along the track, but we did not last very long. The ideas somewhere along the line got curtailed for whatever reason, and we did not get very far. So we have not suffered from ideas. We have not suffered from initial stages of doing certain things that could have had us in a much better place than we are now, I would say. And I strongly believe that we will again, post April the 28th, come back to some of the things that we need to do, to talk about, and to implement. I'm hopeful that we will do some of those things, and that Trinidad and Tobago, our citizens, our less fortunate, that this will be a better place, in that we will not miss again another attempt, which some of us, Gregory and Vanus, and some of my colleagues will, in fact, I'm almost certain, be invited to try and see if they can get going again. So, Tony, I hope we catch some of the boats that will undoubtedly arise. I am an optimist, and I believe that we will get other chances to turn Trinidad and Tobago on a stronger keel.
Yeah, I am getting a sense, and perhaps it's not only from the discussion this afternoon, but generally, the talk about planning and execution of planning. And I will ask in a moment about the PNM's proposal, manifesto proposal about a Ministry of Efficiency, I think it's called. And will that help the situation? And are we sufficiently grounded in planning and execution for the future? You know, I always remember something that Frank Bassotti wrote sometime in the early 80s, when he talked about what Dr. Williams said after the first gush of the oil bread. He said, we don't need a plan anymore. We have all the money that we could possibly have, and therefore we're cool with that. I wonder if that philosophy has gravitated and stayed with us for a long time. You wanted to say something?
So, you know, the quote that I remember is that planning has lost its mystique.
Yes.
You know, Tony, you know, first of all, the whole question of the Forex thing, and what I find interesting about this conversation in the public space is it seems to me that people believe that Forex is something that just happens. Forex has to be earned. And if the country is not earning Forex, then, but we are using and demanding it, then there's going to create tensions between supply and demand.
There's no distribution cannot happen in that circumstance.
No. So that what the government is doing is a plaster to pacify certain elements of the society and so on. But it not going to solve the problem. It's either you adjust the rate so that you bring a greater balance in supply and demand, or you hold tight, as Ronald said, you make adjustments otherwise in the fiscal account, while you put things in place to increase the earning capacity of the country. That's the only solution, really. In terms of, so you asked the question about the EDAB, and again, I think Ronald is right that EDAB is just one of several. I mean, it was an institution, which is different, but there's several plans, including the latest Vision 2030, which was an upgrade on Vision 2020. But intervening in that is the famous Roadmap to Recovery report, which had so many, just like Vision 2020, a number of non-partisan people involved in that. Myself was there, Ronald was there, Rondell Fields was there, Roach, Vasan Bharat was inside of there, Winston Dukaran was a co-chair of my subcommittee, and so on. So you had all these people, nationals, engaged in this thing. The document was done, and that's the last we heard of it. That's simply the last we heard of it. And if you go back there now, you will see a number of things. So in general, I think we've had a problem of implementation, which brings me to your whole question of this Ministry of Efficiency. Seems to me that what the Ministry of Efficiency is about is trying to get right, is trying to treat with this long-standing problem of productivity in the public service and the public service capacity to deliver on projects and to deliver on its mandate across the ministry. So seems to me a little duplication with what is happening, with what the Ministry of Public Administration is supposed to be doing. And so I wonder, functionally, how we will separate the Ministry of Public Admin from this Ministry of Efficiency, but we wait to see if in fact he wins the election. The problem about implementing development plans goes beyond a Ministry of Efficiency, right? We have traditionally, the only development strategy, as far as I could recall, that we've consciously implemented is that gas monetization strategy, that resource-based industrialization strategy. That's the only thing that we've systematically and consistently implemented over time. And for me, the sad thing is that we've not learned from it, because it seems to me, I might be wrong, that the lessons there could simply be moved and transferred to another sector, and we may see better benefits, but that has not happened. And I am not convinced that the Ministry of Efficiency is something that can do that. I think there has to be a consciousness of that method, of what happened to cause us to be successful in energy. It's not a question of putting a plaster on that projects ain't happening, so let me put a Ministry of Efficiency to make projects happen. That sounds very Trumpian to me, and I don't know that is going to work.
Dr. James.
Yeah, well, you could add what Ronnie and Gregory are saying together and start there. But I am not persuaded that the country's problem has much to do with anything to do with any Ministry of Efficiency. The fundamental problem that we have to first solve is we need legislative oversight of cabinet and the executive council in play, with all the voices of our people involved in that oversight process. That's where the scrutiny of public sector actions will come from, in the sense of accountability and transparency and so on that the UN likes to talk a lot about. If you don't set up the government in a way that allows for effective oversight of executive action, you can't get any efficiency. The ministry will just be another variant of autocratic behavior. So that's step one. But once you hasten to do that, there are things that you have to also treat with if the country is going to grapple with its FX problems and pretty much any other aspect of its development programs. You have to clean up the education system that we have in the country as a matter of urgency. I've read these manifestos. They don't have a clue about the fundamental challenges of our education system. You need to split the education system into a two-track system. One track dealing with the traditional academics that we are going with now, and the other track having to do with the skill acquisition. Competitiveness in the global space, in whatever industries we go into, will be tied closely to the development of a skill-intensive track, extending into the workplace, in the way Germany did it, for example, with certification of apprenticeships and so on. So the school system doesn't end when you get your degree. It goes on into the workplace. You have masters in the workplace that are certifying and continually recertifying and facilitating rapid learning. That is something that we're going to need as a matter of urgency if we decided to move down the road of effective, meaningful diversification of the economy. Now, once you do that and you do the constitutional reform, you will unleash the kind of programming that you see, say, in Malta. Every community in Trinidad and Tobago, as you could have seen if you were a student of Lavantil, for example, every community has potential to be a focal point for foreign investment, foreign entrepreneurs coming in. They could be accelerators and incubators even of startups that are looking for a home, and they're not welcome in Trump's home anymore. We should make a home in our communities here. Safe, healthy, happy. But you can't get safe if you are running dictatorships. The information flow will just not be there to allow you to prevent crime and so on. We can't underestimate the barrier that crime poses to development, both in Trinidad and in Tobago. So we're gonna have to clean up those two things in order to clean up crime, and then open up the communities to be centers of attraction of foreign investment and so on. That allows you to focus on the central principle behind development in addition to the speed of learning. And that is that you don't learn from yourself, and you just don't learn from action alone. You have to bring the whole world into your space to collaborate with you. You could do that to produce professional healthcare for export in the communities if you do it properly. We know how to do it. We have been developing programming around along those lines in the UN system in the recent past. I've been just working on that sort of stuff for the Eastern Caribbean, for example. So we know how it should be done. We, just the same way Cayman and Bermuda brought the whole world of expertise, PricewaterhouseCoopers, international law firms, everybody into Cayman. And Bahamas is practicing that now. In order to produce professional services for export, we could do the same for, say, healthcare or education or even financial services. Remember, Manning wanted to go down that road, just didn't have a proper clue as to how to do it. But it was partly a good idea to think about it that way. But when you're running dictatorships, good ideas flash through your mind and they pass out and go on about the business. So you need to think about setting up the government, setting up the country in a way that allows you to bring the world in to produce exportable education, even the creative industries that we are doing. We're so famous for. We're doing it the wrong. This seasonal approach is because we have locked out the foreign investors who could help us develop film, develop documentaries, develop video game technologies, applications of our street theater in the form of video games and so on. We've simply lived in a dreamland of isolation, perhaps because of the post-colonial phobia about the rest of the world. But it is entirely possible if we are thoughtful about how you do diversification to open up new vistas for the country. It all starts with cleaning up the way we govern ourselves and cleaning up the way we educate ourselves. And that, if Ronnie's dreams are going to ever come true, I bet him they'll only come true through those two first steps. Otherwise, you will dream like I would for the rest of our lives.
Gentlemen, we want to thank you very much for being with us. But just before you go, I'm not letting you go just yet. I want a statement from each one of you with regard to the major topic that we entered upon, with regard to whether or not there is light and the possibility for moving from where we are in terms of the economy because of what the political parties have either put on in their manifestos or indeed have said on the platform. I know there's been a lot of talk about wage increases starting at a certain point. On the other side, removing taxation from pensions, etc., etc. What would be your last words, one from each one of you, starting with Ronald, as to what have the political parties, the two major parties, given to the country, given to the electorate with regard to make a selection between A, B, or C? Ronald?
Tony, you have kept the most difficult question for last. first let me say, I don't know that voting behavior in any way and in the past turned at all on the quality of manifestos produced. The PNM manifesto is pretty clear and detailed and fairly comprehensive in terms of what I have read in it as to what they would like to focus on. The UNC's manifesto, I have had, let me say, difficulty in locating what exactly, especially the economics, is about, and what they are likely to do in any case, and then the rest is possibilities, offerings that would get votes, as Gregory indicated. The idea is to say the things that would gain votes. And after that, then we deal with finding the money. And quite a lot of disappointments can arise when delivery time comes. So we got to be careful as a society as to how we move forward. In any case, there's going to be need for fleshing out and detailing what exactly is doable and what kind of time frame in which we can do it and so on. So there's a lot of work to be done. And most important, there has to be a leveling with the population as to where exactly we are and what is doable and what is not doable. So I would like to stop there, Tony, at this point.
Gregory, what do you have to say on the subject?
Tony, so I've listened to the two political parties, and of course, one is saying we've been here for the last 9 years, 9.5 years, and we've started a journey. The economy is turning around, and give us a chance to continue the work. The other one is saying, look, this bunch in office have failed. You know, they've had enough time. Give us the opportunity to take the country out of its 9-year decline, etc. My take is, and my word to the population would be, regardless of who is in power or who wins power on the 28th, do not expect any immediate turnaround of this economy. We are in for some tough times. And those who believe that we could recreate the glory days of the 70s or the glory days of the 2000s or even the glory days of 2012, 2013, I think deluding themselves. It's not going to happen. It can't happen. The resources are simply not there. And that's my disappointment, because I'm not seeing enough focus on how we're going to get to that place where the economy is going to earn more foreign exchange. I just glanced at the UNC manifesto and the attempt to address the crime problem. And I think I was just checking something like 52 initiatives. Now, if you put 52 initiatives in a manifesto, it tells me that you really don't know what you're doing. Or what you're doing is you're putting down everything that somebody tell you so that you could convince some people that you know what you're doing. But there's no way you could implement 52 initiatives. It just lacks focus and just lacks direction. And it's not going to happen. And I sense that I haven't looked at the rest, so let me not comment on the rest of manifestos and so on. The PNM manifesto, when I first read parts of it, I felt that they needed to do something. They need to do another document, because that document to me is very academic, and it's not reader friendly, if I were to use that term. Neither does it articulates the heart of the problem. And if you have not articulated the problems properly, then it's difficult to find a solutions or to convince people that you have this solution. Yeah, so that would be my take on this. I think the population really need to sit down and ask themselves, well, we're going to face hard times in any event. So what is the best of the bad options before me?
I want to ask that question of you, gentlemen, because I have a panel tomorrow, the political analysts who could stick their neck out and make those kinds of, but I respect you, gentlemen, as professional economists, and I don't want to get you into political discourse. So I will leave that question for tomorrow. Dr. James, your assessment, and you know, there's a question that came into my mind when both Gregory and Ronald were speaking as to how does the population, the voting population, the non-voting population disposes itself to manifestos and you know, making a determination about whether to vote or not to vote. I know some young people, including some of my own children, who, you know, throw me out if I say anything about voting. They're not interested. In fact, they got away. They're not here. They're not interested in voting, period. And that's the kind of notion about what do we do about manifestos and plans and programs that political parties put forward as the solution to going forward. Dr. James.
Well, if as normal people think, we agree that past performance is a good basis for shaping future expectations, neither of these manifestos would be credible. Both are magical, and to lean on what Gregory ended up saying, both are incompetently done. So I don't see how anybody could base their votes on these wild promises. What I think will happen in the election is that there will be a large measure of voting against the incumbents. And if enough people in the swing side of the voting spectrum come out to vote against the incumbents, then the PNM will lose these elections. But because of the vacuousness of the whole experience that we are going through now with this campaign, the turnout is likely to be low. And that may open the door for the PNM to survive. Now, whichever one of them wins, it will be gall and wormwood, as best would call it, for Tobago. There's nothing here for Tobagonians to lean on. So I won't be voting for anyone. I think it is critical that the public sends a message that we can't continue to run our affairs on the basis of magical thinking and incompetence. And I think somewhere in the middle, the swing vote will have to kind of find a way to take responsibility for where the country has to go in the future. Unfortunately, we don't have any of the parties that arose like NAR did and even the People's Partnership did to offer genuine alternatives, options for change. So this is a messy situation. I don't envy young people trying to vote in these elections, I have to tell you.
Gentlemen, we want to thank you very much for, and Ronald, for your overtime this afternoon. But
you stayed on.
yeah, they talk kitchen.
Time and a half.
Thanks for staying, Ronald.
The talk catch him, so he had to stay down. So Charles, I'm sure you have a good calypso to play to end off all of this chat. You know, the calypsonians, they put 3 or 4 verses to go together, very pithy, very short, but they make points that sometimes normal people like myself and others take a long time to make it. So, Charlo, that is where we're going to leave it now. And tomorrow, as I said, we talk with the political analysts to see what they are projecting for the future.
Thank you very much, Tony Fraser. Thank you very much to your guests passing through inside the afternoon drive time exchange.
Take care, everybody.
Pleasant night to you. This is how I feel about everything. Hear me? I shine up my ID card and I'm waiting. They tell me how the election coming. And I know as a citizen of this country, to vote, they say, is my civic duty. So I start walking around from meeting to meeting, listening to what politicians saying. But when it came around to election time, just so Stalin changed his mind. Nobody say nothing about chutney music. Nobody say what they gonna do for pan. Nothing about dancers, no calypsonian. Like culture don't exist in this land. When I see how they're treating culture so bad, I send back the polling card. They don't care about me, I don't care about them. Me really want politician friend. About culture, they ain't strike a note. Keep your culture house, I go keep my vote. I went to a meeting quite Diego Martin. They tell me how the PM was talking. Well, I know he and Ralph Maratz, them is actors. But them ain't say nothing about no drama theater. Gypsy come up and he start talking about Manning. About the 50% airplay, he said nothing. Kamala talk about pipe and that wasn't all. Jack Warner come up and talk about football. Nobody say what they gonna do for chutney music. Nobody say what they gonna do for pan. Nothing about actors, dancers, no calypsonian. Like culture don't exist in this land. When I see how they're treating culture so bad, I send back the polling card. They don't care about me, I don't care about them. Me ain't really want politician friend. About culture, you ain't strike a note. Keep your culture house, I go keep me.
Wake up with the Net Radio Breakfast Show. Rise and shine with Wendell Stevens and Richard Raghubarsing.